And Zion Williamson is fully cleared for all basketball activities.
This was just 9 days ago when we got reports that Zion had been fully cleared for basketball activities. And now today we're hearing that there's actually been a regression in healing of his fracture. Welcome back, everybody. I'm Dr. Brian Sutterer, and this is your #1 source for learning about the unique medical side of the world of sports. Just a week ago, we heard that Zion was cleared for full basketball activity and was about to start practicing. So this was a huge shock when we just saw from the Pelicans that Zion had been experiencing some persistent soreness in the foot, underwent some new imaging, and actually showed a regression, which is important here, in the bone healing of his fifth metatarsal. They're scaling everything back, and he's going to be out for an indefinite time. What in the world does all this mean, and what's going on with Zion? Let's do a quick timeline recap.
Zion is returning from a foot surgery suffered at the beginning of the summer. His timeline should get him back on the court in time for regular season. That would be our hope. They're very optimistic he will recover from this, and they are clearing him to continue his progression.
And Zion Williamson is fully cleared for all basketball activities. His first full practice with the team, Zion Williamson, the expectation has been that it would be today. So that is good news for New Orleans. That's good news for Utah.
How's he
He is on track to play this season. I think that the hope is that he's going to get ramped up again this week, but they had to bring him all the way back. They had to dial his entire rehab back last week when he had the setback with soreness. From what I'm told, the hope is that they're able to dial him all the way back into the point that he can do 5-on-5 and practice again, hopefully by the end of this week or next week.
We just have to sort of unload his foot, give him some time to continue to heal and rest and see where we are.
We're now at least 4.5 weeks out from Zion's surgery, and so there's understandably a lot of cause for concern here. Today's statement from the Pelicans is quite a bit different than what we've been hearing. As we know, they've been doing frequent imaging studies to evaluate the radiographic healing of that fracture, essentially looking with something like a CT scan to see exactly how well those two ends of the fracture have healed. This helps to give them more confidence with guiding his return to play. Up till now, we've been hearing that healing was just going very slowly, but there were still signs that healing was progressing forward. Now in today's statement, we heard for the first time that there's actually been regression in that bone healing, meaning it's now gone backwards. Next, we'll dive into an anatomy recap and then what in the world could be going on here. But first, I want to give a shout out to the sponsor of today's video. Thanks to Geology for sponsoring this video, a company that's a longtime supporter of the channel and a product that I'm always happy to recommend. Before I had a skincare routine, I would sit there and watch my wife take really immaculate care of her skin, but I was so overwhelmed with all the different products that she had, the ingredients, and I'd go to the store and I had no clue what to pick, so I just did nothing. But then I heard about Geology, a personalized skincare company for men that's going to basically start you off by walking you through exactly what you're looking for in a skincare regimen. The ingredients are backed by science, and now I can feel good about taking care of my skin without that unnecessary stress. My favorite product of theirs is their Vital Morning Face Cream. It just makes my skin feel soft, healthy, and refreshed as I start off my day. I also appreciate that they have retinol in their products. This stuff is like the powerhouse of wrinkle reduction. Really helps as well with oil, which is something I used to struggle a lot with on my skin. I highly recommend their 30-day trial kits, and if you use code Brian70, you can get 70% off that first order. So you can get that trial kit for as little as $9. Make sure you hurry up because this deal won't last long. Do something nice for your skin and help support this channel by checking out Geology today. Thanks again to Geology for sponsoring the video, and let's get back to our learning. With our biodigital anatomy tool here, I've highlighted the bones of the foot, and specifically here the fifth metatarsal. The metatarsals are the equivalent of the bones that go through the palm of your hand. So they're these longer bones that go through this portion of the forefoot. The fifth one is the one all the way on the outside of your foot. This whole time, everybody's been assuming that Zion had the dreaded Jones fracture, but we've never actually got any confirmation about what specifically the fracture type was, as far as I'm aware. We can break up these fifth metatarsal fractures into 3 different zones. Zone 1 is essentially just the base. It's the most simple, an avulsion fracture where a piece of this base pops off. Zone 2 are your true Jones fractures. These are the ones that are more concerning. And that zone 2 is here specifically between the junction where the 4th and the 5th metatarsal bones articulate. Zone 3 is then further out distal. These zone 2 Jones fractures notoriously have a longer time to heal because of the way that the blood flow goes to this area. Essentially, there's blood vessels that kind of work their way going back up in this direction. And so if you have a fracture line that cuts through here, you lose blood flow to that area and you impair the healing. So there's a higher rate of what we call non-union, meaning the fracture just simply won't heal. That's why a lot of high-level athletes have surgery. It gets them back on the court quicker and has a lower rate of non-union. But again, we don't specifically know if that was in fact what Zion had for his initial fracture. What you have to remember is even when they put some sort of pin or a plate across a fracture, all that's doing is bringing those ends of the fracture closer together and encouraging healing, but it's not like it glues the bone in place. Biologically, we still need that fracture to heal back over so that it's continuous without that break. Pin or the plate secures those two ends of the fracture so they don't move relative to one another, which gives you a higher chance and higher success rates of it ultimately healing. But now Zion is at least 4 months out from the surgery, and there's still concerns that it's not healed. If anything, it's maybe gone backwards. To give you a sense of some expected timelines here, this was a paper published in 2016 that looked at 10 professional basketball players who had surgical fixation of a Jones fracture, and they had an overall radiographic healing time of 7.5 weeks, with return to basketball at around 10 weeks. But key point here, 3 of the athletes experienced refractures. So even though surgery decreases that chance of non-union, decreases that chance of complications, there still is a possibility that you can suffer a repeat fracture to that same area when you try to return to your activities. The wording of the Pelicans statement makes that a concern. Remember that clip of Sean's from the beginning of December saying that he was cleared for all basketball activity. With as closely as they've been monitoring Zion, I can't imagine they're going to let him go back out on the court full speed practices unless there's been clear radiographic and clinical evidence that the fracture is healed. So now that we're hearing about a regression, we have to ask that question whether or not there's been a new injury, a new fracture, or if it just really never was healed to begin with, and maybe what we heard before wasn't totally accurate. Now, finally, I know all this is wrapped up in this much broader conversation about Zion's weight. You can't argue with the physics that somebody who has more body weight is going to put more stress on their foot, and those bones are going to be subjected to more load. Now, the bones have grown and adapted, hopefully over time, to be able to carry and maintain that load. But if you have any significant shift, meaning a excessive gain in weight over a short period of time, the bones might not be able to adequately build themselves up to protect themselves from injury. But also you're putting more load on the soft tissue. And when you're worried about a fracture site healing, more load, more stress makes it harder for that fracture to heal. Compared to just the normal population, high-level athletes are at higher risk of non-unions with these types of fractures. They just naturally put more load, they put more stress, more demand on their bones. And so then if you put more body weight on top of that, it's going to be harder to have a good outcome. We know that obesity is associated with impaired healing of things like fractures. In the study I mentioned earlier from 2016, they did find that those athletes who went on to have a repeat fracture of this bone had different foot shapes that does predispose you to these types of fractures. Something called metatarsus adductus, where basically the forefoot or the metatarsals are adducted, pointed inward. That puts more stress on that 4th, 5th metatarsal junction, raising your risk of repeat injury and risk of something like a Jones fracture. So these injuries are more complex than just put the nail in and let it go. You have to consider the athlete's weight, you have to consider their foot biomechanics, because these are all potential risk factors in terms of how they're going to heal. It's possible Zion has this natural foot shape and just puts more load through that region, making it harder for the fracture to heal and increasing his risk of this happening. It's hard to say what the endpoint is for all this, whether or not Zion could be headed for another surgery to try to maybe put in different hardware, put in something like bone grafting to try to augment that fracture site. The Pelicans and Zion have to do everything possible to look at his risk factors, whether it's foot biomechanics, workload, body weight, nutrition, whatever the case may be, and minimize them as best as possible to give this thing a chance to heal and hopefully minimize instances of this recurring down the road. That's it for the video, everybody. Let me know as always any questions or comments down below, and until next time, we'll see you later.